Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. There's more violence today coming from the Gaza Strip as IDF soldiers come under gunfire while on patrol. No soldiers were reported injured, though an army engineering vehicle was lightly damaged. The IDF has responded by hitting 2 Hamas positions in the Gaza Strip with a combination of aircraft bombings and tank shelling. According to the Shehab news agency based in Gaza, the 2 targets were Hamas observation posts. As of yet, there have been no reports of Palestinian casualties. Tensions are rising again between Israel and the Hamas leaders of the Gaza Strip after the Jewish state's retaliation to a rocket from the coastal enclave. Yesterday, the Air Force attacked 5 Hamas bases in the Gaza Strip hours after a rocket was fired from the Palestinian territory into southern Israel. The missile landed in an open area on Monday, failing to cause any Israeli casualties. Palestinian sources say at least 4 people were wounded in the Israeli strikes. The terror group's spokesman released a statement warning Israel not to target what he refers to as Hamas's resistance positions.
العدو الإسرائيلي يريد أن يفجر الأوضاع في قطاع غزة وفرض معادلات جديدة على المقاومة وعلى أهلنا في القطاع. المقاومة الفلسطينية لديها موقف واضح وثابت أنها لا يمكن أن تسمح مطلقا بفرض أي معادلات جديدة أو تسمح للعدو الإسرائيلي أن يستمر في كسر إرادة شعبنا الفلسطيني من خلال استهداف الممتلكات والمنشآت ومواقع المقاومة، وبالتالي يتحمل المسؤولية الكاملة عن تدهور الأوضاع في قطاع غزة وتفجيرها مع المقاومة الفلسطينية هي حكومة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي التي يجب أن تتوقف عن ارتكاب أي حماقات جديدة بحق أهلنا في القطاع.
There's been no immediate claim of responsibility for the rocket attack from the Gaza Strip, but Israel's long made it clear that it holds Hamas accountable for all terrorism emanating from its territory.
אין לנו שום רצון, שום כוונה ליזום שום מהלך צבאי ברצועת עזה. אבל גם אין לנו שום כוונה לספוג טפטופים. אנחנו לא ניכנס לפינג פונג של ירי וירי כנגד. ואני מציע לחמאס לקחת אחריות, לעשות סדר ולהירגע.
The last large-scale conflict between the 2 sides took place in 2014. Since then, Hamas has observed a de facto ceasefire with Israel, although small armed cells of Islamic terrorists have been launching close to 2 rockets a month at the Jewish state. In related news, there are reports that Hamas has built at least 15 terror tunnels reaching into territory belonging to the Jewish state. This latest apparent intelligence comes just ahead of tomorrow's anticipated release of an internal Israeli governmental report that's expected to be extremely critical of the country's failure to adequately prepare for the same deadly underground threat prior to the 2014 Hamas conflict. Reporters at Israel's Channel 2 News are citing unnamed high-level security cabinet officials as their sources for the claims about the new cross-border tunnels. Nearly 3 years ago, 34 such passages were discovered and destroyed by the IDF during the 50-day battle against Hamas, who used them to carry out attacks against Israeli soldiers and civilians. Since that time, Israeli security forces have been doing all they can to improve their ability to counter the threat. According to leaked portions of the state comptroller's review due out tomorrow, the findings are highly critical of the army for not having properly dealt with the tunnel issue in advance of the conflict, known in Israel as Operation Protective Edge. Plus, it's also likely to attribute blame to the political establishment for improper management of the campaign. Military leaders and the nation's politicians have been squabbling amongst themselves as to who's responsible for the negligence. While more and more rockets seem to be raining down on southern Israel from the Gaza Strip, the head of Israel's military intelligence is reportedly claiming that it's unlikely that Hamas or even Hezbollah will launch war against Israel in the future.
Major General Herzl Halevi told a Knesset committee on Wednesday that Israel should instead be more concerned about the cooperation between the Gaza-based terror group and the Lebanese Hezbollah. When it comes to Hezbollah, the military chief claims the group has been suffering from manpower issues in the struggle to replace aging members. Plus, the group's operations in the Syrian conflict have brought about a financial crisis within its ranks. In the south, Halevi says that the Hamas terror group isn't interested in launching an offensive against Israel, especially because of issues with the separation of political and military leadership in the organization. The military chief's comments come just a day after the release of a scathing report from the comptroller criticizing the efforts of the IDF's intelligence prior to the 2014 Gaza war. Halevi says the Army's intelligence directorate has taken the report's criticism to heart, but claims that the threat posed by Hamas's tunnels was and still is being exaggerated.
A blistering report on the 2014 Gaza war has just been released, and it's calling out both Israeli military and political leaders for failing to adequately prepare for the threat of tunnel attacks from Hamas. Israel's state comptroller released the scathing report last night, revealing shocking gaps in the military's intelligence during the time leading up to the war and a failure to create clear operational plans for how to destroy underground Hamas terror tunnels. The Israeli prime minister, among several other defense and intelligence chiefs, is being scorched for failing to make the Israeli security cabinet aware of the subterranean threat, but the leader is fighting back.
בניגוד לדוח המבקר, אני מגבה את ראשי צה"ל, השב"כ ומערכת הביטחון, ששמרו ושומרים על אזרחי מדינת ישראל. הלוחמים והמפקדים שלנו נלחמו בחירוף נפש, ועם ישראל גאה בהם.
The 50-day conflict, known as Operation Protective Edge in Israel, was prompted by the abduction and disappearance of 3 Israeli teenagers in June of 2014. After the boys went missing, Israeli troops rounded up hundreds of suspected terrorists, most of which were affiliated with Hamas. In response, the Gaza-based terror organization began firing dozens of rockets into southern Israel, and the conflict escalated into a full-blown war. It wasn't until July of 2014 that the Israeli Security Cabinet approved an operation in Gaza, destroying dozens of underground tunnels making their way into Israel. Yet the latest report on the conflict accuses Prime Minister Netanyahu of having kept senior ministers in the dark about that very threat prior to the war. The Israeli leader is denying the accusation, providing 8 dates in November of 2013 in which the Security Cabinet met to discuss the risk posed by the tunnels.
האחריות הראשונה שלי כראש ממשלה היא כמובן לדאוג לביטחון מדינת ישראל ואזרחיה. כך עשינו במבצע צוק איתן. הכינו את החמאס את המכה הקשה ביותר שהוא ספג בתולדותיו. חיסלנו כ1,000 מחבלים של החמאס, את בכירי מפקדיו, הפלנו את מגדלי הטרור, פעלנו בעוצמה, באחריות ובתיאום מלא בין הדרג המדיני והצבאי. אף קבינט בתולדות המדינה לא עודכן יותר. וכשנכנסים לקבינט, צריך להשאיר בחוץ את הטלפון הסלולרי, את הפוליטיקה הקטנה או אינטרסים אישיים.
67 Israeli soldiers and 6 civilians were killed in the Gaza conflict, and over 2,000 Palestinians were reportedly left dead. The families of Israeli soldiers who were killed during the 2014 war are reacting angrily to the new reports and are demanding the Israeli government to take responsibility for their sons' deaths. Today, the bodies of 2 soldiers are still being held by Hamas. Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein is urging lawmakers to, quote, fully adopt the report's conclusions in order to ensure that the next threat does not turn into another war. During the war, it was discovered that Hamas used an extensive network of tunnels to cross the border and launch attacks inside of Israel. At least one of the tunnels was discovered to have led into kibbutz miles away from the Gaza border. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly saying that he still hasn't reached an agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump when it comes to the future of Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on the story.
During a Likud party meeting, unnamed sources have reported that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that he's working with the White House to create a mechanism to deal with future settlement construction, but that it's not as easy as some Knesset members might think. The faction meeting is said to have gotten heated when some MKs advocated for the annexation of large areas of the West Bank, while others think it's best to further separate from the Palestinians while retaining Israeli control over the West Bank. Netanyahu is believed to have cautioned his party members that while the Trump presidency can be viewed as an historic opportunity, it is also important to be very aware of its limits. Lately, the Israeli leader has been walking a political tightrope. While he's avoiding advocating for the two-state solution, he's also been ignoring calls from his right-wing coalition partners to fully renounce it. During his recent summit in Washington, Netanyahu said he doesn't want to annex close to 2.5 million Palestinians to Israel. But on his subsequent state visit to Australia, he vowed that Israel will never relinquish its security control over the West Bank.
Israeli police have finally dismantled 8 homes and another building in the West Bank settlement of Ofra. ILTV's Aaron Porras has the scoop.
Police spent the previous day removing protesters from the properties, resulting in the injury of 8 officers. Earlier this morning, as protesters and demonstrators increased in number and barricaded themselves in and on the last remaining structures, police, dressed in light blue sweaters, attempted to reason with them to leave peacefully, as seen in police video. The 8 families living there had already moved out, seeking to avoid confrontation. Police pleas fell on mostly deaf ears, though, forcing the police removal of many of the activists. According to police, quote, hundreds of young men and women were removed either by peaceful escort or forcefully carried. The buildings slated for demolition were deemed illegal and to be destroyed in February of 2015, which is why they're not protected either by the recently passed regulation bill. But protesters have consistently prevented their removal until today. Several more officers were injured lightly in the clashes and are being treated for their wounds.
The Israeli Prime Minister is praising the American government for its response to a shocking spike in anti-Semitism throughout the country. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, is now offering its services to Jewish communities across the nation, following a series of bomb threats and vandalism in Jewish community centers and cemeteries. DHS has protective security advisors in every single American state, and their advisors will provide support in training, protective measures, information sharing, and exercises. U.S. President Donald Trump also addressed the recent spate of anti-Semitic incidents in his first joint address to the Congress on Tuesday, calling the threats to the Jewish institutions a reminder of the work that still remains in the American path to civil rights. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says he appreciates that the Trump administration has taken a, quote, strong stance in condemning anti-Semitism and is now urging European leaders to do the same. At least 100 Jewish community centers and schools in 33 American states have reported terror threats since the beginning of 2017. The United Nations Human Rights Council is set to host Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Geneva tomorrow at the start of its main annual session that lasts until March 24th. The UNHRC has a lengthy history of targeting the Jewish state, so it's no big surprise the body is critical of the sentence that was just handed down to IDF Sergeant Elor Azaria.
We are deeply disturbed at the lenient sentence that's been given by the Tel Aviv military court earlier this week to an Israeli soldier who was convicted of unlawfully killing a wounded Palestinian in an apparent extrajudicial execution.
As ILTV viewers already know, Azali was ordered to serve 18 months behind bars for killing a Palestinian terrorist who had been wounded while carrying out a stabbing attack against Israeli troops in Hebron last year. The UNHRC claims Palestinian children face far harsher terms of detention for throwing rocks at Israeli civilians, and that the Azaria case risks undermining confidence in the Israeli justice system.
This is a long-standing issue with Israel, and we've been in touch with the Israeli authorities on this issue multiple times over the years. This is a chronic culture of impunity that we're talking about. This is not one individual case. In this case, there actually was a prosecution and a conviction, which is more than we've seen in any of the other cases. However, for a sentence of 18 months to be handed down for such a serious human rights violation is unacceptable.
Israel argues that exactly the opposite is true, and Azalia's conviction for violating the army's code of ethics clearly shows he's being held accountable for his actions, even though the man he killed was undoubtedly a terrorist. Both Jerusalem and Washington point to the UNHRC's record of passing more resolutions against the tiny Jewish state than the rest of the world combined, as proof of its deep bias. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman says the 47-member body has once again demonstrated that in its distorted moral compass, one bullet fired by Azaria at a terrorist is worse than the millions of bullets killing innocents in Syria, Libya, Iraq, and Yemen that the UN fails to condemn. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Dani Danon, echoed that by saying the UN group is completely divorced from reality for sitting silently by as human rights are crushed in Syria and Iran, while criticizing the only true democracy in the Middle East. Supporters of Israel have long argued that the UN Human Rights Council is heavily biased against Israel, and now the new U.S. administration is planning to back up these words with action. Since the UNHRC was founded in 2006, it's put out more resolutions condemning the tiny state of Israel than the rest of the world combined. In fact, each time the council meets, the only permanent item on the agenda for discussion are the alleged human rights offenses committed by Israel, and Washington says it's had enough.
The United States also remains deeply troubled by the council's consistent, unfair, and unbalanced focus on one democratic country, Israel. No other nation is the focus of an entire agenda item. How is that a sensible priority?
The Deputy U.S. Assistant Secretary of State is skewering the Geneva Forum for letting its dishonest obsession with Israel undermine its credibility. She's questioning how it's possible to focus so profoundly on Israel when Syria's government is bombing its own hospitals and countries like North Korea and Iran are denying millions of their people freedom of religion, peaceful assembly, and expression.
The obsession with Israel through Agenda Item 7 is the largest threat to this Council's credibility. It limits the good we can accomplish by making a mockery of this Council. The United States will oppose any effort to delegitimize or isolate Israel, not just in the HRC, but wherever it occurs. When it comes to human rights, no country should be free from scrutiny, but neither should any democratic country be regularly subjected to unfair, unbalanced, and unfounded bias.
The top American official says that the White House is now reviewing its participation in the so-called Human Rights Council unless there's been a reform of its agenda.
In order for this council to have any credibility, let alone success, it must move away from its unbalanced and unproductive positions. As we consider our future engagements, my government will be considering the council's actions with an eye toward reform to more fully achieve the Council's mission to protect and promote human rights.
The United States' three-year term at the forum ends in 2019. While there has been no immediate reaction to Barclay's statements, the group's spokesmen have praised the active and constructive role of the U.S. in the Council. He added that any country seeking to revoke its membership would have to go through the UN's General Assembly in New York. Tragedy was narrowly averted this afternoon when alert security guards were able to successfully head off an attack by an Arab woman who was charging at them while brandishing a weapon. Details are continuing to emerge over the incident, which occurred at the Kalandia checkpoint north of Jerusalem. What we know so far is that the woman is said to have begun her approach on foot in a lane designated for vehicular traffic. After reportedly ignoring repeated orders to halt from guards operating the crossing, she then took out what appeared to be a knife as she continued to advance in their direction. The woman was then overcome and arrested. There have been no reported injuries to the guards nor the suspected terrorist. Israeli technological advances have just garnered even more praise. More than a fifth of the slots on the Fast Company list of the world's most innovative companies have been awarded to the tiny Jewish state. The prominent American business magazine is certainly qualified to make that distinction, given its concentration on technology, business, and design. The 2017 10th edition ranking includes a whopping 11 Israeli companies on its roster of excellence. They were all selected for, quote, tapping both the consumer's heartstrings and purse strings while making a difference in the world. Fast Company's top 50 list includes education, enterprise, and finance categories. Even more amazingly, Israeli firms have earned their very own subsector entirely devoted to achievements in the startup nation. Unsurprisingly, some of the top Israeli companies coming in for special mention include the Waze navigation system and the Unbotify bot detector used to counter cybercrime. Even the Israeli company Weissberger was highlighted, which has introduced innovative analytical solutions to streamline your average pub into becoming a bar of the future. Well, I think we can all toast to that. It's going to be a lot harder for BDS supporters to boycott Israeli products now that over 1,000 Israeli engineers are working with Apple to develop augmented reality for their products. The engineers are now believed to be working hard on the latest project at Apple's headquarters in Israel. The company's CEO says the Herzliya office just outside of Tel Aviv is Apple's second largest research and development office in the world. Some sources claim the teams are creating augmented reality technology known as AR for the iPhone 8. AR is a type of information that allows users to interact with their environments. Just think of the Pokemon Go game. It's more or less the opposite of virtual reality, which closes users off from what's going on anywhere outside of their headsets. The CEO of Apple has already shown interest in creating AR applications for smartphones by snatching up 3 Israeli companies capable of harnessing those dreams into true reality. Apple just dropped at least $2 million to buy the Israeli startup RealFace last month. The cybersecurity company specializes in facial recognition programming that can be used to authenticate users. Apple also bought PrimeSense for $350 million in 2013, an Israeli firm that develops 3D gesture technology. I think it's easy to understand why consumers say they can hardly wait to pick up the next Israeli-engineered iPhone. There's great news for Palestinian high school students who are hoping to gain higher education in Israel. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem has just announced that it's now willing to accept matriculation scores on tests conducted by the Palestinian Authority. Large numbers of Palestinians are now expected to apply to Hebrew U, which is one of the highest-ranked academic institutions in the world. The university is now the first of the Jewish nation's prestigious educational bodies to accept results of exams given by the Palestinian Authority. Until now, acceptance of the Arab hopefuls to Hebrew U was limited to those who did well on the university's own admission tests. Students are also now welcome to enroll in the pre-college program the school offers that's specifically geared towards helping Palestinians reach the university's lofty standards. 67 such students completed that prep course last year, and the number who have applied for the next academic year has now more than doubled. Thousands of Arab students are already pursuing their bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees on the Jerusalem campus, so it's fair to say that Hebrew University can be looked at as a true model of coexistence. Sadly, many Jews emerged from the Holocaust as the sole survivors of their entire communities. But here in Israel, over 200 strangers made it their mission to make sure that even in death, one Holocaust survivor would not be forgotten. 19-year-old Hildy Nathan passed away 2 weeks ago in the Canary Islands, leaving no next of kin. She grew up in Germany, where her family dreamed of moving to the land of Israel, but were unable to get visas to leave. Despite their desperate attempts to flee, they wound up at the Theresienstadt concentration camp, where tens of thousands of Jews were murdered. Hildy's father died not long after the war and is buried in Germany, while her mother passed away a few years ago and was laid to rest in the Jewish state. As part of her final wishes, she asked to be placed next to her mother, and the 20 or so members of the local Jewish community raised enough money to fly her body to Israel for burial. As in many similar cases, more than 200 Israelis responded to requests for mourners to attend the funeral. Organizers say that despite a childhood of humiliation, with no name and only a number, people she never even knew gave Hilde the dignified burial she deserved. The only person at the service who knew her was another Holocaust survivor who says that even though Hilde always lived alone, it seems that the entire people of Israel have come to say goodbye, so she doesn't have to leave alone. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.